Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu Hanavi, the weeping prophet. Two books are associated with him, of course, the book of Jeremiah, but also the book of Lamentations, in Hebrew known as the Megillah Echa, the Megillah Echa, which is read on Tisha B'Av, roughly the 9th of August every year, the day both temples were destroyed. In the second book he wrote, Echa, or Lamentations as we call it in English, he's mourning and bemoaning all the things he predicted were going to happen in his first book. And he's very much personal regret that the people didn't listen to him, because all the way through the first half of his ministry, God was pleading with the people practically. Not that God has to plead, but certainly Jeremiah was pleading for the people to repent. Don't let this happen. Don't let this happen. But the people had their own way. Like all of Israel's prophets, of course, Jeremiah prophesies for 3 different time periods. He prophesies for his own time, the events leading up to 585 and 586. What's interesting is he continues to prophesy even after that, for at least 20 years or more after that, after the captivity was underway from Egypt. So he prophesies for his own time. Now what is also interesting is the book of Jeremiah, most of it is not in any chronological order. It's not in any chronological order. It's in more of a thematic order. Critical scholars say it's because different manuscripts were randomly fused together. More conservative scholars say Jeremiah intentionally arranged them that way because he was dealing with themes more than chronology. He was dealing with themes more than chronology. The order of the books in the Hebrew Old Testament, in the Hebrew canon, although they're the same books, they're in a different order than we have in English. We order the books more or less, not really exactly, but more or less something along a chronological timeline. While in the Hebrew canon, they're organized by literary genre. Tanakh, Torah, Navim, and Ketuvim, the Pentateuch, the prophets, and the writings. There's a reason. So it's not all chronological, so it's hard to think of the book of Jeremiah that way. But he basically prophesies over a period, a long period, then a shorter period that lasts about 11 years, then a longer period of over 20 years, then a short one for 11 years, and then he goes on beyond that. And he's been around a long time. He began when he was a kid. He began when he was a little boy and continued doing it until he was an old man. His whole life he did the same thing. God called him from the earliest days of his youth. Well, we're going to begin by looking in a moment at the things he was up against in his lifetime. The things he was up against. But first of all, his time was a time when the Babylonian captivity was breathing down their neck. Now remember, whenever we see this idea of Babylon and Babylon is coming, it is a foreshadowing of Babylon the Great in the book of Revelation. Secondly, he prophesies for the first coming of Jesus, particularly concerning the role of Israel and the Jews. Some of you know this already, but look at Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 13. For my people have committed 2 evils. His people have committed 2 evils. They've forsaken me, the fountain of living waters. Now we know from John chapter 7 what the living water is. It's the Holy Spirit, John 7, 38 and 39. Unbelieving Israel would forsake, they would reject the Messiah who would give the Holy Spirit. They would forsake, they would reject the Messiah who would give the Holy Spirit, the one who would give the living water. John 4, John 7, Isaiah 44. But then they would do a second evil. They would hoop for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns, that can hold no water. They would invent a spiritually bankrupt false religious system. They would invent a counterfeit Judaism. They would invent Talmudic Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism. They would invent the counterfeit you see today. What you see today in the synagogue is a counterfeit. It rejects the Messiah. It's spiritually bankrupt. It's Ichabod. The glory has departed. They have no temple. Anybody can simply read the Torah and see there was no rabbis in the Torah. There were Levites, but they don't have them today. There was no synagogues. They came later. Originally it was the temple and the tabernacle. That's gone. They can see that most of the mitzvot they can't even keep. It's a different religion that they invented. They pretend it's the same religion. Now, if you don't know, there is a tremendous, tremendous parallel to Roman Catholicism. Roman Catholicism invents a different Christianity. It is not the Christianity of the New Testament. They invent something very different, but pretend it's the same thing. But anybody reading the New Testament would not find a pope or a purgatory or rosaries or any of this stuff, but they try to pretend it's the same thing. Spiritually bankrupt. So he predicts what will happen. He predicts what will become of Israel and the Jews. They would reject the Messiah, who would give the Holy Spirit, and then invent another religion. If you don't know, that's why the woman at the well in John 4, where he says, I'll give you the living water, she left her cistern at the well, remember? She abandoned the Samaritan religion. She abandoned it. Only the Messiah could give the living water. Well, he prophesies of the first coming. He speaks of the Messiah as a netzer, a righteous branch. A netzer, a righteous branch. Now in Hebrew we have the issue of wordplay. Wordplay is very important in Hebrew. In English we use wordplay, as I've explained before, as either a joke or as an advertising gimmick. When we use one word that sounds like another in English, colloquially, it's either a joke or it's some kind of an advertising gimmick. In Hebrew, certainly in biblical Hebrew, it means the opposite. When you see wordplay, it's there to draw people's attention to something very, very important. And we see this wordplay right from the beginning of Jeremiah. He's not the only prophet who does it. Amos is also quite fond of the technique, but Jeremiah certainly employed it. Netzer. The Messiah would be a righteous netzer, a righteous branch. Now, in Matthew chapter 2, in the Nativity narrative, it says, he shall be called a Nazarene. There's no such verse anywhere in the Old Testament. There's no such verse, he shall be called a Nazarene. What you have is Netza, Netza. Netzer. Almost the same. You use one word that sounds almost the same as another, like you're intentionally misspelling it to draw people's attention to something important. Now Amos also does this. What do you see? I see a basket of summer fruit. If the summer fruit is not picked by the summer, the sun's going to destroy it. In in Amos chapter 8. So he says, the end has come for my people. The word there is kayetz, summer, but the termination, a terminal end is ketz. Ket uses one word that sounds like another. Well, this is an important literary feature of Jeremiah. He continually does it. Every time we see it, it means something. Every time he does it, God is drawing our attention to something important. Right from the beginning, Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 11. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, what do you see, Jeremiah? And he said, I see a rod of an almond tree. The rod of an almond tree. Shaked. Shaked. I've got to be careful because my wife is Israeli, and although she's a mathematician by profession, she has a degree in Hebrew. Some people marry a good cook, some people married a good housekeeper, I married a good concordance. The word of the Lord came to me saying, "What do you see, Jeremiah?" And I said, "I see a rod of an almond tree." And the Lord said, "You've seen well, for I am watching over my word to perform it." Now that term watching means to diligently. To, he's not just watching it, he's watching it intently. Watching it intently to make sure it happens. When you see wordplay in the Hebrew scriptures, and Jeremiah is the master of it, everything else hinges on what he's saying with the wordplay. So what he's saying is, listen, I warned Joel what was going to happen, and Joel warned the people. I warned Isaiah what was going to happen, and Isaiah warned the people. It's going to happen. I'm watching over my word to perform it. It's going to happen. He always points back to the previous scripture. Remember, any true prophet of God, their message will always be based not on a revelation or a vision. It'll always be based on what's already in scripture. The vision or the revelations they may have will be scripturally based. But the basis of what they predict will never be the vision itself. The foundation of what they're predicting or saying is going to happen will always be what is already in the Word of God. Now that will go a long way in helping us dispel a lot of the nonsense being passed off today as prophecy. Before God tells Jeremiah anything else, he says, I'm watching over my word to perform it. If you don't know what's in the scripture already, if you don't know what Joel warned of, what Micah warned of, and what Isaiah, particularly those are the three he would have been most concerned with, Isaiah, Micah, and Joel. If you don't know what they warned of, don't worry, I'm watching over my word to perform it. It's like a dynasty. He's following through on his predecessors. Well, let's continue. So he's speaking for his own time, but he's speaking for the first coming. And the Messiah is called a righteous branch. Chapter 23. But now let's look at Jeremiah 31. Quoted in Matthew 27. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord. I will make, literally, I will cut a new covenant, Brit Hadashah, Bet Israel, Bet Yehuda. I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day I brought them by the hand out of Egypt. My covenant which they broke. Although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. The New Testament, the new covenant, is predicted in Jeremiah. It's predicted. But it would not be like the old one. I've explained before Satan paganized the church in the 4th and 5th century, his first trick, his first attempt to seduce the church was not to paganize it, but to Judaize it. I did not say Jewishize it. It was historically and culturally already Judaic. It was Hebraic. Christianity is a Jewish faith, spiritually, theologically, and historically. But Judaize, to go back under the law. To go back under the law. So many of the trappings of things like Eastern Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, etc. are indeed of pagan origin. Bowing down to graven images, counting prayers on beads, and these things come from the pagan world, obviously. However, that's not the beginning of it. The beginning of it is back under the law. In the Old Covenant, the divine presence was in an ark, a box, right? So you see in the Anglo-Catholics, the High Church, or the Roman Catholic Church, where do they have Jesus? They say it's the blessed saint, put him back in a box. In the New Covenant, it's a priesthood of all believers. But under the law, it was the Levites. Oh no, there's a separate clergy. Back under the law! In the New Covenant, we do works because we've been saved. Under the law, you do works to hope you're going to get saved. Back under the law. Well, here's what he was up against. The people thought because they were members of a national covenant, because they were circumcised and are members of a national covenant, and at Brit Milah, circumcision as babies, they thought that assured them a relationship with God. It became cultural. It's what Moses and Jeremiah would decry as those who are circumcised but are not circumcised, or are not circumcised of heart. It was their religion. It was not their faith. It was their religion. It was not their faith. But it was based on this ritual. Circumcision. Of course, Satan would try to get this same thing into the church. This is what the book of Galatians is largely about. But what he was up against is these people thought they were somehow right, or had some kind of a set of guarantees, simply because of the law of circumcision, because they were part of a national covenant people. And many Jews think that to this day. They think, I'm all right, I'm Jewish, I'm a member of the chosen people. That's what they think. What Jeremiah was saying is, when the Messiah comes, there will be a new covenant. It will not be like the one with their fathers. It will be a personal faith. You will need to make a personal decision. But of course, after Constantine pseudo-Christianized the Roman Empire, what did they do? Back under the law. A theocratic state. They made baptism the equivalent of circumcision. You understand? Oh, I'm right, I'm a Christian, I'm part of the covenant, I was baptized as a baby. Back under the law. The very thing that Moses decried, the very thing that Jeremiah said the Messiah would get rid of, the very thing that John the Baptist said he was going to get rid of. You think you're Abraham's children. God could raise up Abraham's children out of the stones. The very thing that John the Baptist, Jonah Makbil, and Jeremiah and Moses railed against and said the Messiah would get rid of, the very thing that Jesus did get rid of, the Roman Catholic Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, and mainstream Protestantism put back. Do not believe the Reformation was a success. The Reformation was more of a failure than a success. Just look at the main Protestant denominations today. They're ordaining homosexuals and God knows what else. But it was wrong from the beginning. You would have had to break this unscriptural marriage of church and state. Stop telling people they were Christians when they weren't. But the Lutherans, the Anglicans, the Presbyterians, the Calvinists especially, they equated baptism with circumcision. Instead of going back to the New Testament, they went back to Augustine. After Constantine made Christianity the religion of the state, Augustine began redefining Christianity along the lines of Plato's philosophy, but also his idea of this union of church and state. But the new covenant's supposed to be different. It's not going to be like that one. Oh no. Back under the law. It's Judaized. It's Judaized. I'm not saying there are not true believers in churches that sprinkle infants, but there's a time bomb within it. It's any church that practices infant baptism is programmed for self-destruction theologically and spiritually. Any church practicing the folly of infant baptism is programmed with an inbuilt time bomb. It is going to, at some point, explode. Theologically and spiritually, it's a formula for disaster. It's a wrong idea. The new covenant, Jeremiah predicted, would be different. Now, we can't understand what he meant, what the new covenant really means, unless we go back to see Jeremiah's prediction of it. You can't properly understand the new covenant beyond a very superficial level unless you understand its fulfillment of the old. Unless we go back and read people like Jeremiah, we're not going to understand the New Testament beyond the kindergarten level. Why is he talking about the new covenant? Well, let's continue. What was he up against? The third time frame he prophesies for is the end of the age. The end of the age. Now we have to be very careful. This in itself is not uncomplicated. We use the word that's almost a misnomer. Eschatology, which most Christians take to mean the study of end-time prophecy from the word eskatos in Greek. This is not accurate. This is accurate. Sunteris tau años. The close of the age. In the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, the apostles ask, what will be the sign of your coming and the close of the age? Eskatos has a more general meaning that comes from the book of Jeremiah. Of course, Jeremiah was written in Hebrew and Septuagint was translated into Greek. But look with me, please, to Jeremiah 23, which I believe is the heart of Jeremiah's message. In this chapter, Jeremiah tells the people what's going to come. He tells them all kinds of things. He speaks of the righteous branch we mentioned in verse 5, when I shall raise up for David the Netzer, the righteous branch. And he goes on prophesying, and he tells them what's going to happen, and what the Lord was going to do and how they were going to be driven into these lands. And he goes on about the adultery and the prophet and the priest and the wickedness, and he speaks about all these things that were going to come upon them. But he tells them, in the last days you will understand it. In verse 20, in the last days you will clearly understand it. Now when we see last days, we think of the return of Jesus. This may or may not be the case. We have to be very careful. I've explained this before, but it comes from Jeremiah. Look please to Hebrews chapter 1. God, after he spoke in verse 1 long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions and in many ways. The portions there are the Perek HaShavua, the section of the Torah and the Haftorah that's read weekly in the synagogue in an annual cycle, and liturgically. In these last days he's spoken to us in his Son. It was the last days 2,000 years ago. Eschatos, when we get the word eschatology, can be understood latter days as opposed to former and latter. The old covenant existing in Jeremiah's day is the former days. The age of the new covenant that he predicts in chapter 23 are the latter days, when the age of the church takes place. Everybody understand? It's a general term. Last days can simply mean the age of the new covenant, the times of the Gentiles, the age of the church, things like that. It's when you use close of the age. We are speaking of the last 7 years of lunar history by the lunar calendar and the events leading up to it. We have to understand that distinction. Most Christians don't. They just use the term eschatology without understanding the full implications of what it means. Latter days and last days are not necessarily the same thing. The last days will occur at the end of the latter days, but the latter days does not equal the last days. So when we see Jeremiah saying latter days, we have to ask, when is he speaking of the New Testament era? And when is he speaking of the return of Christ and the events leading up to it? Okay? Jeremiah reiterates certain themes. Now what's interesting is, the themes that Jeremiah continually reiterates are the very ones employed by Jesus in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. One of which is the temple. Jesus begins predicting the events of 70 AD when they ask him about the last days, doesn't he? Well, Jeremiah is the same thing. Remember, the first temple and the second temple are destroyed the same day, Tisha B'Av, roughly the 9th of August. The first one destroyed by the Babylonians, the second one destroyed by the Romans. But of course, Peter's epistle tells us the early church identified Rome with Babylon. The mystery religions of Babylon found their way to pagan Rome via Pergamum in Asia Minor by Peter's day. Rome was spiritual Babylon in the first century church according to Peter's epistle. She who was in Babylon greets you. So the Romans destroy the second temple the same day of the year as the Babylonians destroy the first. Jesus picks this up from Jeremiah. Secondly, what he continually goes on about, false prophets. When we read the Olivet Discourse, Jesus warns about the proliferation of false prophets more than he does anything else as a sign of the close of the age. He emphasizes the same thing Jeremiah does. The same thing Jeremiah does. Paul follows Jeremiah as well when he speaks of end-time prophecy. A false peace. Ultimately, the Antichrist will make a treaty with Israel that will seem to bring a peace to the Middle East, but it will be a false peace. It'll be a covenant with death. But there'll be a quest for peace. Men's hearts will fail them for fear. They'll do anything to have peace, including, ultimately, trust the Antichrist. They will trust anybody but the Prince of Peace. The one person who can actually deliver peace, the Prince of Peace, the Sar Shalom Jesus, they'll reject him, but prefer the Antichrist. That's true of Israel, it's true of the nations. It's true of the harlot church. They'll prefer him to Christ. a false peace. Well, Jeremiah keeps saying, they say peace, peace, but there is no peace. Now, we've explained many times the word peace does not simply mean an absence of conflict. It comes from the infinitive of the Hebrew verb leshalem, to pay, to fill, to fulfill. We have shalom, peace. Leshalem, shalom comes from leshalem. We have shalom because the Messiah came to fulfill the law, to fill us with His Spirit, okay, and to pay, leshalem, the price for our sin. We have shalom because the Messiah came to leshalem, to pay, to fill, to fulfill. As I've said a number of times, you can be in the biggest conflict of your life and have shalom, the peace that passes all understanding. Now ultimately, God's shalom will include the absence of conflict. It will include that. In the millennial reign of Christ, the nations will indeed beat their spears into pruning hooks. It will ultimately include that, but that's not what it is. Even though it will ultimately include it. I can't promise an absence of conflict, but I can promise peace in the conflict. Shalom, if you trust Jesus. Okay. The Greek word is Irene. The girl's name, Irene. It means peace, but it means this absence of conflict. Well, that's not shalom. A false peace. They'll say peace, peace, but there is no peace. Well, Paul picks this up, doesn't he? He says at the end, when men say peace and safety, then the end will come. We cannot understand New Testament eschatology in the sense of end-time prophecy, the close of the age, unless we understand the book of Jeremiah. If you don't understand Jeremiah, you're never going to understand Matthew 24 or Luke 21 or the book of the Epistle to the Thessalonians. When men say peace and safety, then the end will come. Now this is what he was up against. Do we have another bunch?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. The mentality he was up against. The environment, religious and cultural, he was up against. The poor guy, actually he was a poor kid from Anatolia, on the outskirts of Jerusalem, not far from a place I used to live called Neve Yaakov. He was beating his head against the wall because the people did something. And they did it because their leaders were doing it. It was passed on from their leaders to the people. He uses some very, very strong language that we would consider altogether inappropriate to say in a church. Yet, he made no qualms about it. Verse 21 of Jeremiah 10. The shepherds have become stupid. They've not sought the Lord, therefore they've not prospered. He goes on and he says, my people are stupid. Now, the word stupid here is an interesting one. My wife could explain it better than me, but it's abil. It doesn't mean they were congenitally of low intelligence or anything like that. It meant they were stupid by choice. They were stupid by choice. Abil. They perverted their logic in order to justify that which they knew was false. They perverted their logic to justify believing something that common sense should have told them was false. The people have become a stupid people, a stupid society, because their leaders were stupid men. Now, that's very strong language. But the last days are going to be the same thing. those professing to be the people of the Lord are going to pervert their logic in order to justify things that common sense should tell them are wrong. And they're going to do it because they're going to listen to leaders who are going to do the same thing. This is not talking about stupidity in the sense of being born with a dearth of intelligence or low IQ or anything of that. This is the low aptitude. This is talking about people who are stupid by choice. We choose to be stupid, like a yobo, stupid and proud of it. They want to be that way. Well, this was a bad situation Jeremiah was up against. Don't expect anything different from the church in the last days. Don't expect anything different from most of the church in the last days. A stupidity by free choice. That originated with religious leaders. Jeremiah said this more than once. He used these terms. My people are stupid. The leaders are stupid. I don't want to go on about it. You all know, but we know. I remember watching videos of people at St. Andrew's, Chorleywood. And there was a woman there with a blackened eye and broken glasses. Her eye was all swollen. And she's standing there laughing. And another guy was standing there going like he was a pogo stick. And another woman was going like this, imitating a bird. And this Anglican charismatic bishop, David Pitchers, was in the middle of it, saying it was a revival. And he asked this woman what happened to her, and she's standing there laughing when her eye was all swollen. She needed medical attention, and she's sitting there. Somebody should have drove her to casualty, and she's standing there. He said, "Would you?" Somebody was slain in the spirit. They fell on me. This is stupidity.
Yeah.
This is rank stupidity. Now, St. Andrew's, Chorleywood, you understand that these are upper middle class educated people. They're not disadvantaged people or anything like that. They're not uneducated people. They were people who were behaving stupidly of their own volition. They were stupid by choice because their leader was stupid by choice and he was telling them to be stupid. And they thought this was spiritual. Spirituality in their perverted mind equals stupidity. This is what was frustrating Jeremiah so much. Can't you see this is crazy? They refused. Well, that's one heck of a situation, isn't it? But it's not an unfamiliar one to us, is it? Not an unfamiliar one. Second, Jeremiah goes on and talks about the nations that surrounded them and their gods and religions. Because the people of God kept playing footsies with other religions. They thought somehow they could prevent a military invasion that ultimately would come from Babylon. They thought somehow they could make a peaceful environment by giving some kind of recognition to other religions. And they began worshiping their own God, whose name, Yahweh, was to be unique. But Yahweh was called your Baal, your husband. The Canaanites, of course, had another Baal. Oh, you got a Baal, we got a Baal. And they began fooling around with the gods of these nations. Jeremiah was warning about this. He was talking about what they were like. And he would say things like, in chapter 10, like a scarecrow in a cucumber field are they. They cannot speak, they must be carried because they cannot walk. Do not fear them. They can't do you any harm and they can't do you any good. But the people kept fooling around with these other religions. Verse 15, they're worthless, a work of mockery. In the time of their punishment, they will perish. And it's in this context, he makes his scathing remarks that the shepherds, that is the pastors in verse 21, the Ro'im, have become stupid. The society had become ecumenical and interfaith. In its religious culture, the society had become ecumenical and interfaith in its religious culture, and their leaders were leading in this way. Now there were a number of gods, but the two that caused the biggest problem were of course Baal, because Yahweh was called Baal, it lent itself to seduction the easiest. Just like the Muslims claiming that Allah is the same as Elohim. Well, Allah is a generic term in Arabic for El or Elohim in Hebrew, but it's not a proper name of Yahuwah, of Yahweh. But it lends itself to it, and you'll find people. Now you've got people practicing Chrislam, or organizations like Youth at the Mission and things like this, fooling around with this stuff, saying it's somehow compatible. But it's another God. A God of a nation right next to Israel, isn't it? Saudi Arabia. That was one. The other was the Queen of Heaven, the female cult deity. Jeremiah says they'll be sacrificing cakes to the Queen of Heaven. The term Theotokos, Mother of God, in Greek is nowhere found in the New Testament. Theotokos was the title of Diana of Ephesus, also known as Artemis. Her chief place of worship was in Ephesus. At the Council of Ephesus in the 5th century, the post-patristic church, when Christianity was becoming a hybrid of paganism and Christianity, or let's say Christendom, the Council of Ephesus in the 5th century, Mary was proclaimed Queen of Heaven, Mother of God. But it was purely pagan. Jeremiah is warning, this is wrong. She's not the Queen of Heaven. There's no Queen of Heaven. There's only a Melech HaMelechim, only a King of Kings. No Queen of Heaven, the term is not in Scripture. But they went to this female thing, the female cult deity. And you're seeing it now. The Mary cult and the acceptance of Roman Catholicism. Mary's the co-mediatrix, the co-redemptress. This is the same thing. Spiritually, it's the same thing. Ontogenetically, it's the same thing that Jeremiah was up against, and it comes back in the last days. Everybody understands? You can't understand what's happening now until you understand what's happening then. Now there were other gods as well. Ultimately it came to Moloch worship. That was the third one. When they began killing the kids. And they sacrificed the kids with an economic motive. It was economically motivated human sacrifice. Today we call it the abortion industry. Non-therapeutic abortion. What's happening now is what was happening in the days of Jeremiah. He saw it, he understood it, he tried to explain it, but most people wouldn't listen to him. Now again, he appeals to the scripture. His his successor would be Ezekiel. Ezekiel is warning about the Babylonian goddess Tammuz. Worship the Madonna holding the baby. None of this stuff is new. It all comes from Babylon. You can call it Eastern Orthodoxy or the Greek Orthodox Church or the Roman Catholic Church or the High Anglican Church. It's all from Babylon. Well, these are the things he was up against. People just wouldn't listen. Jeremiah's message was repeatedly, look what happened to the 10 northern tribes in the Assyrian captivity in 721. They didn't listen to Amos, they didn't listen to Hosea, they didn't listen to Elijah, so look what happened to them. They wouldn't pay attention to Elijah and Elisha, they wouldn't pay attention to Amos and to Hosea. Look what happened to them. Now the same thing is going to happen in Judah. And the people said, oh no, we're the house of David. We have the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. It won't happen to us. That was their thinking. They relied on the building. Now there was a divine presence, the ark was there, but they thought that meant because the Lord was with them, they wouldn't take account of the fact that they weren't with him. The ark was in the first temple. The Lord was with them in that sense. But they were not with him. Think of a backslider. At what point the Lord takes his hand off of a backslider is another issue. Saul didn't know the Spirit left him. But we know that although backsliders leave the Lord doesn't leave them. He's trying to get them back. But because he's still, in some sense, with them, because of his patience and forbearing and love, trying to get them back, because the Lord is still with a backslider, assuming they were ever really saved to begin with. That doesn't mean the backslider's with him. They can't rely on the Lord the same way that somebody who walks with him faithfully can. You understand? They do not have the same assurance of somebody who walks with him faithfully. The Lord may be with them in some sense, but they're not with him. They thought it cannot happen to us. Not since William the Conqueror had anybody successfully invaded Britain. 1066. The mentality of the people in Britain for years had been, we resisted Napoleon. Nelson stopped him at Trafalgar. Britons never shall be slaves, rule Britannia. We're an island nation, and Britannia rules the waves, and Napoleon didn't get here. He tried it. Okay. And, you know, that was it. That's how they thought. Well, Hitler wanted to invade Britain, but he didn't do it. But he did just as much damage as if he had, you know what I'm saying? There was a false sense of security. In the last days, this is going to be a big issue. There is a false sense of security. There were people trying to warn America for years. Stop giving Muslims visas. These people are dangerous. But you've got political whores in the White House who are owned by oil companies and in bed with the Saudi Arabians, and they give them visas. You get September 11th. But they always, that's something we watch on the news. Those bombings by Muslims only take place in the Middle East. That won't happen here. But then it happens in New York and in London. This false sense of security. These pagan nations will turn against you. You cannot make peace with them, but they thought they could by pandering to their religion. In chapter 10, Jeremiah is saying, don't pander to their religion. Those nations and their demon gods are going to come under the Lord's judgment. And if you continue to pander to them, you'll come under his judgment as well. Well, that was true in Jeremiah's day, and it's true in our day. But their national leaders, like their religious leaders, were stupid people. They were stupid by choice. The people who run the BBC, they're stupid by choice. The ones who endeavored to tell the truth, like Jeremiah and Baruch, were objects of public ridicule, scorn, and ultimately persecution. Last week, California, I read something. A Christian school in Durham, in this country, Christian school in this country. Ofsted inspectors came and began asking little children, 6, 7, 8, without their parents' consent or presence, over the heads of their teachers, about homosexuality and Islam. The Ofsted inspectors, who could have been Muslims and homosexuals themselves, by the way, they seem to have a hiring preference with the British government, decided that these children were not being properly groomed to live in a multi-faith, multicultural society. They were not being properly taught at the age of 6 and 7 about homosexuality, lesbianism, same-sex marriage, or the worship of Allah. So Ofsted says we're going to legally move to close the school down because you don't fit their agenda. They will go after homeschoolers the same way. They demand the right to your children. They demand the right to superimpose their perverted and godless values and their worship of other gods on your children. Now, instead of the church being up in arms, most of the church is saying and doing nothing. There are certain people like the Christian Institute and so forth who are trying, but generally speaking, they're more concerned with other things like spring harvest in Greenbelt, where these other gods are getting in. This was the same environment that Jeremiah was up against. Same kind of thing. Those who told the truth and who were personally faithful to the scriptures, to the Lord on the basis of His word, they were vilified. They were mocked, ridiculed, scorned, treated as a social fringe element, and then ultimately persecuted. Because of these things, the wrath of God will come. Last week in America, in the state of Oregon, 2 Jewish believers who owned a baking shop, they made customized wedding cakes. His name is Aaron and his wife's name is Melissa. Jewish believers. Forced out of business by astronomical 6-figure fines because lesbians sued them because they said we cannot make a cake for a lesbian marriage because of our faith. And the judge said you have to, and they said we can't, and they've lost their livelihood, they've lost their business. No Christian firefighter who was a fire commander in Liverpool. He was forced to attend sensitivity training run by homosexuals. He said, it's against my faith. Well, you've got to go. Either to the sensitivity training or you've got to go. You're not a firefighter. And he took early retirement. Last month, an Afro-American believer, Baptist guy, fire chief of Atlanta in Georgia, was fired because he wrote a book, not in his capacity as a fire chief, just a personal book. One statement and one paragraph on one page of the book expressing his Judeo-Christian conviction that homosexuality was not acceptable to God. Fired! Now these are in countries that profess to be democracies. They are not democracies. We've lost democracy. It's the illusion. Our leaders are evil men controlled by Satan. Satan lives in the White House. Satan lives in number 10 Downing Street. Satan is the chairman of Parliament. Satan runs the American Congress. People have turned their backs on the faith of their fathers and forefathers. Satan is making the laws. Judges are just decreeing from the bench and making laws that are more and more anti-Christian. Politicians will do nothing. Nothing. And it's not going to get any better. I was at a children's mission in Uganda about a year and a half ago. They're taking care of AIDS kids. We were down there. I was there with Dave Royal. Wonderful lady. When I was there, Hillary Clinton had still been the American Secretary of State. She was threatening black African governments to withhold American aid if they would not change their laws on homosexuality. As if enough people in Africa weren't dying of AIDS already. Hillary Clinton wants more dead blacks, apparently. Because that would spread it more than anything. I guess enough black children, enough black people aren't dying from AIDS already. Hillary Clinton wants to kill some more. It's the American government. These are evil people. They're controlled by the devil. Do I pray for them? Yeah, and I pray the judgment of Christ on them. This is something Christians are not comfortable with. But it comes straight from the book of Jeremiah. Imprecatory prayer. I've had people say to me, oh, we should pray for President Obama, we should pray for Mr. Blair, even though His last act as prime minister was to push through legislation saying that lesbians and homosexuals had co-equal right of adoption. We should just pray for them. Things got to the point in the book of Jeremiah where God told Jeremiah, don't even pray for these people anymore. When they're fooling around with other gods, when they're killing kids, when they're persecuting the righteous. God said, don't even pray for them anymore. Look with me, please, to the book of Revelation, chapter 6. Verse 9, Revelation 6. And when he broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, wilt thou refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? This is the New Testament. Imprecatory prayer. They were praying for the judgment of God to fall. The judgment of God will fall. It will fall just as surely as it fell in the days of Jeremiah. A lot of Christians are not comfortable with the reality of imprecatory prayer. But it is a reality. It is a reality. It is. It's an absolute reality. There are certain things where God draws the line. Killing kids is one. Touching the apple of his eye. Anti-Semitism and persecution of the Jews is another. Persecuting the faithful church is another. I'll bless them that bless thee and curse them that curse thee. Nobody has ever persecuted Israel or persecuted the true church and gotten away with it. You're touching God's children. Nobody has ever gotten away with it. Anybody who's persecuted the Jews or persecuted the true church has come under the wrath of God. Now God might have allowed it because of the sin of Israel or the sin of the church. He may have even allowed it. But they're his children. They're his to correct. In Jeremiah's day, Hezekiah had died. A good man with an unrighteous son, Manasseh. The sin of Manasseh became so bad with sacrificing the babies to Molech. Judgment became inevitable. Even when Josiah came, judgment could only be postponed, not prevented anymore. The first half of his ministry, he's pleading with the people to repent. After that, he said, it's gone so far. Even if you repent, the axe is going to fall. America's killed 55 million babies for no reason. It didn't spare the natural branches. Judgment becomes inevitable. Oh, but if my people who are called by my name will turn from their sin and pray, don't you believe in 2 Chronicles 7:14? Oh, I did believe in it. When Jeremiah said it. When Elijah said it. But when they wouldn't listen to Elijah, what happened? We didn't listen. I don't mean just the nation. I mean the church. The church didn't listen to Dave Hunt. The church didn't listen to Martin Lloyd-Jones. The church didn't listen to Francis Schaeffer. All this stuff you see happening, there were people who warned the church. Why should the nations listen if the church won't listen? That's the way it was in the days of Jeremiah. That's the way it is in the last days. That's the way it is now. This is what to expect. What he was up against. And more. As we'll see as we go along. But there was something else. And that's what we'll pick up after the break. Look with me, please, to Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 30 and 31. An appalling and horrible thing has happened in the land. The prophets prophesy falsely. The priests rule on their own authority. And my people love it so. But what will you do in the end? They would have rather believed a lie than the truth. They would rather have had their ears tickled than repent. That's what happened. My people, not unbelievers. My people love it so. But what will they do in the end? No wonder he was the weeping prophet. On the other hand, the book of Jeremiah is continually punctuated with a message and an assurance of future hope. For the faithful. Even after the fact, in the book of Lamentations, right in the heart of the most depressing thing ever composed by a human hand, right in the middle of Lamentations, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, his mercy never comes to an end. The situation becomes hopeless. It's hopeless. This is what's going to happen again. This is what is happening. It's going to end the same way it did in Jeremiah's day. It's going to end the same way as it did in 70 AD. The people began trusting the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. It's going to be the same thing. In 70 AD, they did the same thing they did in Jeremiah's day, in 585. The last day is going to be the same. This is what's going to happen. It's hopeless. We've reached the point where it's hopeless. But if we trust Jesus, we have a sure and living hope. It's hopeless for the harlot church. It's hopeless for the apostate church. It's hopeless for the backslidden church. It's hopeless for Christendom. By the grace of the Lord, it's not hopeless for us.